So if you'd like to know more about my approach to Shinran and how Shinran's teachings relate to the general Buddhist tradition, you can check out my book, The Promise of a Sacred World, Shinran's Teachings of Other Power. So I first came across Shinran in the 1990s when I was living in England, and a friend of mine was studying some of Shinran's writings. Particularly he was studying a short text called the Shoshinge, the Hymn of True Faith. And he began to describe to me some of Shinran's ideas. More than anything, what I understood him to be saying is that through our own efforts, we can't become enlightened. This really struck me because that is normally how Buddhism talks about the path. That is to say, we make effort, we tread the path, and through treading the path, we become awakened. But I myself had started to realize that this wasn't really working for me, and that I felt that I was further away than ever. So the idea that I couldn't myself become enlightened paradoxically seemed like a real relief. It could have seemed very discouraging, but it was the opposite of that. It was actually encouraging because it accorded with my experience. But of course, Shinran goes quite a bit further than that. And what he says is that we can place our confidence in Amida, Amida being, let's say, the enlightened mind, and that the enlightened mind is trying to break in on us, is trying to communicate itself to us or through us. And if we become receptive to that, then we can start to feel the sense of a higher purpose, a higher will that is working its way through us. And this way of talking very much resonated with me. And it also reminded me of my very, very first connection with the Dharma, which was also in England. When I went along to a Buddhist center, I don't know if it was like the one in Orange County, but anyway, like a small place in a city called Leeds in England. And why did I stay? I really don't know. I could have just gone once and never gone back again. But I went, I stayed, and here I am, something like 35 years later, still following the same path. And when I think about what inspired me, even to go there in the first place, and certainly to stay there, it's very, very difficult to think of that as my own personal will. And in fact, very often, my own personal will didn't want to do that. It was bored, it was nervous, it didn't feel welcome, it wanted to do something else, but some other voice or some other impulse came in and how would I put it? Directed my actions, really. So it's a bit like, and this is what I very much see in Shinran, it's a bit like having a mundane will and then a more transcendent will that occasionally steps in or comes through and makes better decisions, actually. Makes much better decisions than I normally make for myself. And again, Shinran talks a lot about this. On the day-to-day level, we're often very distracted. Our minds are thinking about all kinds of things, all kinds of unskillful things even. Maybe we get angry, maybe we're not very attentive, maybe we're quite distracted. But despite all of that, there's a different impulse, there's a higher impulse that is drawing us towards or pushing us towards the three jewels, towards awakening. And that's what human reality is like. So for me, that Shinran paints a very, very complex picture of what it's like to be a human being trying to be in relationship to a spiritual ideal. And that's what I find so compelling. So he doesn't say that, oh, okay, so you've been gifted the awakened mind, Amida has transferred wisdom and compassion to you, and now there's no problem. He actually says that in that very process, you discover more and more fully your own failings, your own faults, and actually the process of connecting or honoring more and more fully the awakened mind is also a process of waking up more and more fully to one's individual failings. So that's a very paradoxical and quite complex reality to live within, but it very much resonates with my own experience. And that's one of the many reasons why Shinran's teachings have spoken to me. He seems to be one of the very, very few Buddhist teachers who speaks with real humility about himself. So many of the teachers that we see in the history of Buddhism, they seem more like myths. They're very, very idealized. But in some of his writings, Shinran actually makes direct confessions about his own failings, which I don't remember ever seeing in any other Buddhist teacher in history. And again, I found that very, very compelling because one can readily connect with an individual human being who is actually facing the limitations and possibilities that the human life offers. Even though he lived a long time ago, he seems psychologically quite close.
Yeah, what I really got out of your book was to try to appreciate the feeling behind what Shinran is saying, like to not dwell on doctrine so much, but like you said, it's like a personal confessional. It's very deep, very spiritual. And when you really highlighted that, it really helped me read it more as like a spiritual diary.
That's a really good phrase, actually. I like that, spiritual diary, because even if we think about something like the Kyogyo Shinsho, which is obviously his most dense work,
yeah,
on the surface of that, it's just somebody who's assembled a bunch of passages from scriptures, and it kind of looks a bit boring, really, and very hard to find your way into. But even in that very, very technical work, occasionally there are these bursts of personal confession or personal revelation, which you think, wow, where did that come from? And so clearly it all forms a whole, and it's important to understand all of those passages in the light of what Shinran is ultimately trying to do, which I think is very, very personal, very humane. And I think that also comes out a lot in the hymns. The hymns have a very, very humane tone to them, and also his letters, of course, as well. That comes out. And so to feel, if you like, that I'm having a conversation with a kind of 12th century, 13th century Japanese Buddhist is really quite thrilling. And on the one hand, to think about the fact that, well, the culture that he lived in was very, very different from mine. On the other hand, I feel that some of the essential issues that he's facing in his life are exactly the same as mine.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly, I think, the business of waking up more and more to what it is like to be an embodied and limited human being, but to have the longing towards something unlimited or something limitless, which obviously Amida symbolizes. And to my mind, that encapsulates the essential religious position, let's say, that we're longing for transcendence, but we're constantly waking up to how non-transcendent we are, or how limited we are, how flawed we are. And he always seems to maintain both of those things at the same time.